The Portland rain tapped soft and steady against Lila Marlowe's apartment window, the kind of quiet background hum that had become the soundtrack to her peaceful, uncomplicated life at 29. It was a Tuesday evening, routine and calm. She'd wrapped up her case manager shift at the Youth Outreach Center, picked up takeout teriyaki on her walk home, and curled up on the couch with her rescue cat Mochi, curled heavy on her lap. 12 years, she thought. 12 years of building something entirely her own, with zero help, zero handouts, zero contact from the family who'd erased her without a second thought when she was 17. She'd been a kid back then, coming home from her part-time grocery store shift in small-town Idaho, exhausted and ready for bed. Instead of the warm lights of her family's modest house, she'd found dead silence, cut utilities, empty closets, and every trace of her parents' and 16-year-old sister stripped clean. On the kitchen counter, tucked under a salt shaker, was a crumpled note in her mother's looping handwriting, only 6 words that had rewritten her entire life. "You'll figure it out." They'd moved 2 states away to Arizona in the dead of night, leaving their 17-year-old daughter to fend for herself. No money, no warning, no explanation. Back then, Idaho law considered 17 a legal adult, a technicality that let them walk away without legal consequence. Lila had spent her late teens couch surfing, working double minimum wage jobs, crashing in shelter lobbies on cold nights, and fighting tooth and nail to not break. She'd gotten her GED, worked her way through community college, landed her social work job, and built a safe, steady life in Portland. She'd buried the hurt deep, locked the old note in her desk drawer, and never looked back. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, cutting through the quiet. She assumed it was her best friend Jessa, checking in like she always did after work. But when she flipped the screen over, her breath caught sharp in her throat. The number was unrecognized, but the name attached to the text made her chest go tight with old, buried panic. Carol Hale, her mother. Her thumbs hovered frozen over the screen, every calm routine of her evening shattering in an instant. 12 years of radio silence. 12 years of no calls, no texts, no birthday messages, no apologies, nothing. And now, out of nowhere, Carol's short, casual message stared back at her, as if a decade of abandonment had never happened. "Hi, Lila, it's your mom. We're in Portland for the week. We'd love to see you and catch up after all these years." Mochi lifted her head, sensing her tension, and nuzzled Lila's trembling hand, but the comfort didn't land. All Lila could see was that empty Idaho kitchen, the lonely note, the terrified 17-year-old girl who'd had no one to turn to. They'd left her to survive alone, convinced she'd figure it out. Now that she'd finally built a life worth keeping, they'd come back like they belonged in it. She stared at the text, her mind spinning with confused anger and a tiny, shameful flicker of longing she hated herself for feeling. For 12 years, she'd defined herself by moving forward without them. Now her past was knocking on her door, and she had no idea if ignoring it would let her stay safe, or answering it would unravel everything she'd worked so hard to build. Lila spent half the night staring at her mother's text, her thumb hovering over the reply button again and again. Part of her wanted to block the number, delete the message, and pretend nothing had changed. That quiet, protected life she'd built felt too fragile to disrupt. But another part of her, the part she tried to crush down every day, needed answers. After 12 years of silent wondering, she could not let them walk back in without explanation. She typed one short, guarded reply. "I can do coffee tomorrow afternoon." She told herself it was just one meeting. A single chance to close the chapter, not rewrite it. Jessa warned her over a quick morning call that she was walking into a manipulation trap, that people who abandon you do not return out of love. Lila promised to stay grounded, to keep her boundaries tight. But doubt lingered all through her workday. The cafe was a bright, busy spot in downtown Portland, filled with weekend foot traffic and the warm smell of roasted coffee. Carol and Robert arrived 10 minutes early, dressed nicely, smiling like doting parents who'd simply been away on a long trip. There was no guilt in their eyes, no hesitation, no trace of the people who'd left a teenager stranded with nothing. Carol pulled her into a loose hug the second Lila stepped inside, her tone warm and overly familiar. "You look so mature, so put together. We've missed you so much." Lila stiffened, pulling away quickly. unsettled by the false intimacy. For the first 20 minutes, they made empty small talk, commenting on Portland's weather, her job, her apartment, like they'd kept up with her life all along. When Lila finally pressed them about why they left so abruptly 12 years ago, Carol's smile faded into a practiced, somber softness. "It was a hard season for us," she said smoothly. "We were struggling financially, stressed beyond belief. We had to start over fast. We thought you were old enough to handle it. It was tough love, Lila. We did it for your own good." Lila's blood ran cold. Tough love. That was how they justified abandoning their child in the middle of the night. Robert nodded quietly beside her, never once contradicting his wife, never taking responsibility for his own choice to leave. They framed their cruel abandonment as a life lesson, painting themselves as brave parents instead of people who ran from their duties. Anger simmered low in Lila's chest, sharp and hot. She'd survived homelessness, hunger, and endless lonely nights because of their choice, and they refused to acknowledge any harm. Before Lila could fire back, the cafe's bell jingled. A young woman with familiar hazel eyes stepped inside, hesitant and quiet. Maya, her little sister. Now 26. Maya glanced at their parents first, then locked eyes with Lila, a guilty, nervous expression on her face. She walked over slowly, like she was afraid to break the fragile peace. Carol reached for her hand, pulling her into the seat beside them, and offered Lila a gentle smile. "We didn't want to overwhelm you," Carol said lightly. "Maya wanted to see you too. She's been so excited to reconnect with her big sister." Lila's head spun. She'd prepared to face her parents, but not the sister who'd left with them, who'd lived their new life while Lila suffered alone. When their parents excused themselves to grab drinks at the counter, Maya leaned forward, voice lowered to a shaky whisper. "Don't believe everything they say," she murmured quickly. "The story they told you, it's not the whole truth, not even close." The second Maya's quiet warning faded into the cafe's background noise, Lila's entire perspective shifted. The tough love narrative her parents had clung to was nothing but a polished lie, and Maya's guilty eyes confirmed it. When Carol and Robert returned with their lattes, wearing calm, unbothered smiles, Lila's resolve hardened. She was no longer here to listen to their excuses. She was here to protect the life she'd built. She cut straight through their idle chit-chat about Arizona weather and Maya's new job, her tone steady and unyielding. "You left me with nothing at 17. No money, no keys, no explanation. Just a note. That wasn't tough love. That was abandonment. I'm not angry for the struggle. I'm angry you erased me like I never mattered." Carol's face dropped instantly, her warm demeanor vanishing. She leaned forward, voice sharp with defensiveness, the mask of a grieving parent slipping away. "You're being ungrateful. We sacrificed so much to rebuild our family. We've waited 12 years to have you back, and this is how you speak to us." Robert finally spoke up, his tone passive but firm. "We all suffered, Lila. You need to let go of the past. Family's all that matters." The words stung. They'd spent 12 years building a perfect family unit without her, yet now demanded she overlook every cruel detail to fit back into their picture. Lila shook her head, her throat tight but her stance unwavering. She told them she was open to slow, respectful contact, but only if they stopped rewriting history, stopped using guilt to manipulate her, and finally admitted their mistake. Her boundaries landed like a slap to the family. Carol huffed, crossing her arms, while Maya sat silent, caught between her parents and the sister she'd never known. The short meeting ended tense and unresolved, with Carol leaving with a cold final remark. "We'll pray you find forgiveness soon." Within hours of Lila arriving home, the harassment started. Blow-up texts flooded her phone, alternating between guilt-tripping pleas and passive-aggressive accusations that she was bitter, broken, and selfish for holding a grudge. Carol posted vague, sorrowful captions on social media about lost children and broken family bonds, letting distant relatives and acquaintances assume Lila was the cruel, estranged daughter who'd turned her back. Jessa called immediately after seeing the posts, furious on Lila's behalf and urging her to block them entirely. But Lila hesitated, haunted by Maya's whispered secret. She knew cutting them off completely would bury the truth forever. That night, after hours of relentless messages, Lila made her choice. She muted their notifications, set strict contact rules, and sent one final boundary text. No more guilt, no more lies, no more public performances. If they wanted connection, they would earn it honestly. Just as she locked her phone and tried to calm her racing mind, a new message popped up from Carol, cold and uncompromising, shifting the game entirely. We're leaving Portland in 3 days. If you ever want to fix this family, you'll come visit us in Arizona. Lila spent the next 2 days stuck in a quiet, exhausting limbo. Her parents' Arizona ultimatum hung over her every thought, a heavy weight she couldn't shake. Jessa kept pressing her to ignore the request, pointing out that forced reconciliation was never healing, only another form of control. Lila knew her best friend was right, but Maya's whispered warning lingered, looping in her head long after the cafe meeting ended. She couldn't walk away without knowing the full truth. Against Jessa's explicit advice, Lila took a chance. She sent Maya a private text, simple and straightforward, asking if she was willing to meet alone. No parents, no lies, just honesty. To her surprise, Maya replied within minutes, quick and anxious, agreeing to meet at a small neighborhood park near Lila's apartment that evening. The park was quiet as dusk fell, empty of crowds, only a few streetlights flickering on to cut through the growing dim. Maya arrived alone, fidgeting constantly, her shoulders tight with tension, like she was scared to be caught talking to Lila in secret. The second they sat down on a wooden bench, she admitted she'd been carrying guilt for over a decade. She told Lila their parents had fought nonstop in those final months in Idaho, buried under crippling debt and bitter resentment. But she only shared fragments, skipping over critical details. She said their parents had panicked, desperate to escape their failing life, and insisted bringing Lila would ruin their fresh start because she was too old to adapt. Lila clung to the partial story, misreading Maya's hesitation as full solidarity. She left the park believing her parents' abandonment was purely selfish fear of starting over with a teenage child, a conclusion that softened the cruelty just enough to make her question her hard boundaries. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering if forgiveness, even partial forgiveness, was possible. She started to second-guess everything, her years of survival, her strict boundaries, her refusal to bend to her family's pleas. She convinced herself Maya was on her side, that the two of them could unpack the past together and finally get the truth their parents refused to admit. Blind to how little Maya was actually willing to risk, Lila let her guard down completely. She spoke openly about her loneliness, her trauma, the endless nights she'd wondered why she wasn't enough to stay for. Maya listened quietly, nodding sympathetically, never correcting her incomplete assumptions, never sharing the full story she hid behind her guilty silence. Lila went home that night, conflicted but hopeful, convinced she'd found an ally in the sister she'd lost. She thought the slow path to truth and closure was finally opening up for her. But her phone lit up before she could unlock her apartment door. A text from Carol stared back, cold and knowing, stripping away every bit of her fragile hope. Maya told me all about your little talk. Stop poisoning her against us. Lila's fingers went numb the second she read Carol's text, a cold rush of betrayal flooding her chest. She'd trusted Maya, opened up her oldest, rawest wounds, and her sister had run straight to their parents to report every word. The fragile hope she'd clung to shattered instantly, leaving only bitter clarity. Maya was not her ally. She was still their parents' daughter, loyal to the family that chose itself over Lila 12 years ago. Lila didn't reply to the text. She stood frozen in her apartment hallway, the evening chill seeping through the open window, replaying every nervous, guilty expression Maya had worn at the park. All her hesitation hadn't been fear of conflict. It had been guilt over hiding the full truth, and shame over betraying Lila again. Determined not to let their manipulation win, Lila spent the night digging into old, buried memories and faint online records she'd avoided for years. She'd never dared investigate the Idaho chaos that preceded her abandonment, too afraid of what she'd find. But now, with her guard reset and her naivety gone, she pieced together the fragments no one had ever told her. The family hadn't left because of generic financial stress. They'd accumulated tens of thousands in unpaid credit card debt and unpaid local business loans. Creditors were closing in, threatening court judgments and wage garnishments that would have destroyed their chance at a new life. 17-year-old Lila, legally classified as an adult, would have been tied to their financial mess through family liability records. She wasn't abandoned out of tough love or fear she couldn't adapt. She was left behind purely as a legal loophole, discarded to keep their debt clean, to let Carol and Robert restart their lives in Arizona with zero financial baggage, zero consequences, and zero extra burden. Every hardship story her parents had told was a calculated lie to cover their selfish cowardice. The realization knocked the breath out of her. All those years she'd spent wondering what was wrong with her, why her family didn't love her enough to stay. None of it had been her fault. It had never been about her maturity or her adaptability. It had only ever been about their greed and fear. Just as Lila processed the brutal truth, her phone blared with an incoming call from Robert. His voice was frantic, uncharacteristically desperate. No trace of the calm, passive man from the cafe. He skipped all pleasantries, cutting straight to a begging plea. "Lila, your mom's sick. She has a heart condition we've been managing, and her medical bills are piling up fast. We can't cover them alone. You've built a stable life. You have savings. You owe us this much. Please, you have to help us." Lila stared at her phone in quiet disbelief. After abandoning her to escape their own financial ruin, after lying for 12 years to save their pride, they now had the audacity to beg her to fix their new financial crisis for them. Robert's plea landed like a slap across the face, sharp enough to strip Lila of every last shred of sympathy she'd held for her family. After spending 12 years paying the price for their old financial mistakes alone, they now expected her to bail them out of their new troubles. The hypocrisy was staggering, and it left her sick to her stomach. She declined his request flatly, her voice steady and cold. "I spent my late teens homeless because of your choices. You don't get to ask me to save you now." Robert fell silent on the line, his desperate tone hardening into quiet resentment before he hung up without another word. What followed was a relentless wave of pressure from every side. Carol began forwarding screenshots of medical bills, crying over text about her failing health, painting Lila as a cruel, ungrateful child who would let her own mother suffer. Relatives Lila had never known existed started sending passive-aggressive messages, repeating the family's manufactured narrative that she was bitter, selfish, and broken beyond repair. The stress spilled into her work life. Lila found herself unfocused during client sessions, her patience thin, her mind constantly drifting back to the abandonment and the lies. For the first time in years, she questioned the stable, grounded identity she'd built. If her own blood could twist truth so easily, she wondered what else she'd gotten wrong about her life. Jessa grew frustrated watching her spiral. She reminded Lila repeatedly that she did not owe them forgiveness, money, or effort. But Lila couldn't shake the quiet, childhood ache she'd carried her whole life, the desperate wish to belong to a real family. Every guilt trip chipped away at her resolve, wearing her down until she felt completely isolated. She'd lost her tentative trust in Maya, burned the bridge of possible reconciliation with her parents, and now stood alone against a family determined to drain her or destroy her reputation trying. She stopped replying to their texts, stopped overthinking their lies, and finally admitted the painful truth she'd avoided for 12 years. There was no loving family to reconnect with. Only people who'd always chosen themselves over her. By the end of the night, her resolve hardened into something quiet and unshakable. The little girl who'd begged for their love was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to protect the life she'd built, no matter the cost. Just as she turned off her lights to sleep, her phone pinged one last time. It was a voice note from Maya, sent long after midnight, shaky and hesitant. Lila hesitated before pressing play, unsure what new lie or manipulation waited for her. But the words she heard next froze her completely in the dark room. "I lied to my parents about our talk, and I lied to you too. Everything you think you know, it's worse. So much worse." Lila stayed up long after midnight, replaying Maya's shaky voice note on loop, each word sinking in deeper than the last. It's worse, so much worse. For years, she'd thought she understood the worst of what her family had done. Cold abandonment, selfish escape, calculated lies. But Maya's confession confirmed there was a darker layer she still hadn't uncovered, one her family had buried for over a decade. This time, Lila refused to fall back into old patterns of doubt and grief. She was done waiting for other people to give her answers. She was done reacting to her family's endless manipulation. For the first time since they'd re-entered her life, she shifted from vulnerable survivor to deliberate protector. She texted Jessa first, laying out everything. The debt loophole, the lies, Maya's partial truths, and the cryptic voice note. Jessa arrived early the next morning, steady and firm, helping Lila sort through her tangled emotions and form a clear plan. No more secret meetings, no more uncertain boundaries, no more letting the Hale family dictate her peace. Lila dug out the crumpled original note from her desk drawer, the one she'd kept hidden for 12 years. She scanned it carefully, saving digital copies for safekeeping. She screenshot every guilt-tripping text, every manipulative message, every passive-aggressive social post. For years, she'd kept these hurts private, too proud and too wounded to share. Now she understood they were evidence. She scheduled a brief counseling session through her workplace trauma program, finally letting herself process the abandonment she'd never fully healed from. The therapist helped her name what she'd endured: emotional discard, familial exploitation, systemic manipulation. It was not tough love. It was not a necessary sacrifice. It was abuse disguised as family duty. With clarity finally settling in her chest, Lila established non-negotiable rules. She would no longer respond to random demands, financial pleas, or emotional ultimatums. She would only engage on her own terms, with full transparency, and only to uncover the final truth Maya was hiding. Her family sensed the shift instantly. When Lila went radio silent, their messages grew more frantic, their tone shifting from entitled anger to desperate pleading. They were losing control of the narrative, and they hated it. Lila knew their patience was thinning. They had always operated best when she was unsteady, guilty, and questioning herself. Now that she was calm, grounded, and prepared, they had no leverage left. That evening, her phone buzzed with a new text from Carol, one that erased all remaining doubt about their next move. It was short, aggressive, and final. "We're coming to your apartment tomorrow. All of us. We're done doing this over text. We will settle this face-to-face." Lila did not panic at Carol's threat. She had spent 12 years surviving their mistakes, and one prepared confrontation would not break her. She texted Jessa to come stay nearby, then set firm ground rules before her family arrived. No entry into her apartment, no public emotional scenes, no more vague accusations. Every conversation would happen strictly in the building's main lobby, where witnesses and neutral space would keep them from twisting the moment to their advantage. The next afternoon, the entire Hale family showed up together. Carol walked in first, wearing a frail, exhausted expression, leaning on Robert like she was moments from collapse. Maya trailed behind them, her head down, shoulders hunched, clearly dreading what was about to unfold. They'd come ready to perform the perfect wronged family, prepped to paint Lila as cold and unforgiving in front of passing neighbors and building staff. Carol wasted no time launching into her script, voice trembling loud enough for strangers to overhear. She spoke of her fragile health, of years of grieving her lost daughter, of how Lila's stubborn pride was tearing their family apart. She wove every lie they'd relied on for 12 years into a heartfelt public monologue, turning Lila's trauma into a personal failure of forgiveness. Lila stayed calm through the entire performance, refusing to rise to the bait. She held up her phone with the scanned copy of the original note, ready to dismantle every word. Before she could speak, Maya stepped forward, her voice sharp and unsteady, cutting through her mother's theatrics. She confessed the truth they'd buried for over a decade. The debt was never the full reason. Back in Idaho, 17-year-old Lila had discovered Carol was hiding a years-long secret affair, one that threatened to destroy their marriage and tank their community reputation. They left her behind not just for financial clean slate, but to silence her. They feared she would stay, expose the truth, and ruin their chance at a fresh start in Arizona. Lila's blood ran cold. She had been abandoned not for legal convenience, but because she'd known too much. She'd been discarded to protect her mother's reputation. Carol's mask shattered instantly. The frail, grieving mother act vanished, replaced by raw, unfiltered anger. She snapped at Maya for betrayal, screaming that she'd ruined everything they'd rebuilt. Robert stood silent, defeated, no longer able to pretend their choices were noble or necessary. In one unguarded moment, every layer of their lies crumbled away. The tough love excuse, the financial hardship narrative, the accidental separation, all of it was a calculated cover-up. Humiliated and cornered, Carol locked eyes with Lila, her tone icy and final. She tossed aside every pretense of wanting reconciliation and issued her ultimate ultimatum. Either you accept us fully, no more questions, no more grudges, no more digging up the past, she hissed, or we walk away forever. Your choice. The lobby went quiet after Carol's ultimatum, the hum of distant traffic and hallway chatter fading into background noise. Lila stood face to face with the family who'd spent 12 years rewriting her trauma, staring down the ultimatum they believed would break her. They thought she'd cave, that the orphaned little girl inside her would choose blood over dignity, that she'd beg to belong no matter the cost. Carol's jaw was tight, her performative fragility completely gone, only resentment and pride remaining. Robert stood motionless, resigned to whatever outcome arrived, while Maya watched with watery eyes, knowing the damage their family had done could never be undone. Lila lifted her phone, displaying the scanned image of the crumpled note that had defined her youth. Her voice was steady, unshaken, clear enough for every one of them to hear without room for misinterpretation. You left me at 17 with nothing but this sentence. You didn't abandon me out of hardship or tough love. You abandoned me because I knew your secret. You threw your daughter away to protect your reputation, then spent 12 years lying about it, painting me as ungrateful for surviving the cruelty you chose. She listed every manipulation plainly: the financial lie, the guilt-tripping texts, the public social media performances, the desperate demand for money when their own choices caught up with them. She did not yell, did not break, did not give them the emotional reaction they wanted to exploit. I've spent 12 years building a life worth living, all on my own, Lila continued. I survived the nights I went hungry, the couches I crashed on, the loneliness you never cared about. You don't get to walk back in now, demand unconditional forgiveness, and force me to erase every scar you gave me. She offered her final, non-negotiable terms. Supervised, casual contact with Maya only, if Maya chose it. No parental involvement, no family gatherings, no demands, no public narratives, no obligation to fix their problems, no requirement to accept their lies. Carol scoffed immediately, refusing to surrender control. That is not family. Either you take all of us, or you take none of us. Lila nodded, her heart finally settling into peaceful resolution. Then we take none of us. The words landed hard. Carol froze, clearly stunned she'd chosen herself over the family bond she'd spent decades weaponizing. Robert's shoulders slumped in defeat. Maya cried silently, trapped between the only family she'd known and the sister they'd destroyed. Without another word, Lila stepped back, closing the chapter on the people who'd made her childhood a nightmare. She watched as Carol turned and stormed toward the exit, Robert following silently behind her. Maya hesitated, glancing at Lila one last time, before reluctantly trailing after their parents. The lobby emptied slowly, the tension lingering thick in the air. The fight was over. The lies were exposed. The ultimatum was answered. But as the front doors clicked shut behind them, Lila stood alone, realizing the hardest part was not the confrontation. It was living with the permanent choice she'd just made. After the lobby doors closed for good, Lila stayed standing for a long moment, quiet and unrushed. The weight of 12 years of confusion, grief, and unspoken longing finally lifted off her chest. There was no crushing sadness, no bitter regret, only a calm, gentle relief she'd never thought she'd feel. The endless cycle of questioning, blaming herself, and craving a broken family's love was finally over. Jessa found her minutes later, walking softly across the lobby. She didn't push Lila to talk, just pulled her into a quiet, steady hug, the kind only chosen family can give. Lila melted into the embrace, releasing the last of her tension. For years, she'd believed her strength came from surviving alone. Now she understood her real strength was choosing herself, even when it meant letting go of the blood ties she'd spent her life mourning. Back in her apartment that night, Lila pulled the faded, crumpled note from her desk drawer. She traced the old ink of the words that had haunted her adolescence. "You'll figure it out." As a scared, homeless 17-year-old, those words had felt like cruelty, like abandonment, like a sentence of loneliness. But now, at 29, they meant something entirely different. She had figured it out. She'd figured out how to be brave, how to be kind, how to build a safe, honest life without anyone's help. She'd figured out her worth didn't depend on her parents' love or approval. She'd figured out that family was not born, it was chosen. 3 days later, a quiet text arrived from Maya, sent privately, free of parental oversight. "I'm sorry. I'm so tired of lying for them. I want to know you slowly, on our own terms." Lila smiled through a faint, tender ache and replied with a simple, open yes. She knew healing with her sister would be slow, messy, and unforced. There would be no rush, no pressure, no more secrets. It would be real, for the first time in their lives. Lila never heard from Carol or Robert again. No more texts, no more ultimatums, no more guilt trips. They vanished back to Arizona, forced to sit with their own choices and the consequences of their lifelong lies. Weeks passed, and the quiet routine Lila loved returned, but it was no longer fragile. It was rooted and unshakable. She went to work, cared for her clients, laughed with Jessa on late nights, and let herself enjoy the peace she'd fought so hard to earn. The abandoned girl from Idaho was no longer hiding inside her. She was healed, seen, and free. She tucked the old note back in her drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as a trophy of survival. She didn't need closure from her family anymore. She'd given it to herself. For the first time in her life, Lila was home, not in a house, not with a last name, but firmly, unapologetically within herself.